Welcome to the Gallimaufric Science Podcast, a podcast about science, art, and culture. My name is Tommy, and joining me are two of my co-hosts, Scott and Raven. Zach couldn't be here with us this particular week. This episode is part one of our two-part discussion on the Netflix documentary Alien Worlds. But before we do that, let's have a bit of a catch-up on what's everyone been up to in the meantime. I'll start over with you, Scott.
Hi, yeah. Basically, one of the things I've been working on or reading is a lot of old comics from the 80s called Gru. But I've also been getting into Robert E. Howard's Conan short stories. I will say this about Robert E. Howard's work. It is better than H.P. Lovecraft's. He is one of the big three from Weird Tales, the other being Clark Ashton Smith. And I've just been really enjoying these stories, although they sometimes are a little laborious to get through. I can't think of anything else. So back to you, Raven.
Well, as far as I've been concerned, I kind of got sucked into this game online called King of Avalon. It's one of those conquest games. It's fun enough, and I found some nice people to play with, so it's kind of occupied a lot of my time, I guess. We've also been playing a Dungeons and Dragons game, Scott and I, with our good friend Brianne Lyons. That has been a bunch of fun because we also kind of suckered my nephew Gabriel into it. He's the one that I was reading the Paleo Artist Handbook to last month. He is now one of our seasoned players, as it were. He's been in 2 games so far, so that's huge. And he's a natural. We really do like his imagination. He came up with a really cool monster that he called an ink bear. So think an owl bear for all you D&D buffs out there. But instead of it being an owl, it's part squid. So you get the tentacles and the big weird beak and the huge bulging eyes, and that I thought that was pretty cool. So we're gonna probably come up with some great art of that at some point. And speaking of art, I finished up with a commission that I'm really excited about. It's Rebecca Hunt Foster commissioned me to do some artwork for Girl Scouts of Utah. We got the final approval on the design, and now it's just to the vectoring process so they can get it made into shirts and patches, and looking forward to seeing those in the real world. Hopefully she'll take some photographs of her troops in them. I'd like to see how they turn out. That's basically what we've been up to for the past month.
I was actually just going to say that the squid owl thing sounds a little bit like the tentaculate from XCOM Terror from the Deep, which I think the design itself is actually a crib of a Dungeons and Dragons type monster.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, that thought just came into my mind. Well, as for what I have been up to, well, I actually have a new book chapter that's been published in a new book called The Evolution and Fossil Record of Parasitism. So this book has been kind of 2 years in the making, because that's about how long ago since I've written the first draft of that particular book chapter. So my book chapter is called Parasites of Fossil Vertebrates, What We Know and What We Can Expect from the Fossil Record. And it's published in this book, The Evolution and Fossil Record of Parasitism, which have multiple academic contributors writing about many topics relating to parasitism and infectious diseases in the fossil record. This is an academic book, so it'll probably be pretty expensive. However, parts of it are available to read for free on Google Books. And instantly, my chapter, which happens to be chapter 1, is available to read for free in full on Google Books. So I'll provide a link to that in the show notes. In non-academic writing, I have a new post over at the Parasite of the Day blog about some nematode worms that infect umbrella squid and use them as a way of completing the life cycle in various different kinds of large predatory marine animals, including large teleos, such as swordfish and the likes, and also in sperm whales as well. So sometimes these worms that have different life cycles, they find themselves inside the same squid. And that's when you have a problem, because one of them completing the life cycle means basically a dead end for the other. So there's some kind of interesting interactions going on there as well. I've also been reading quite a few things as well out of the half a dozen books that I've been reading in between now and the last few months. One that particularly stands out is Pure Invention by Matt Alt. The full title of the book is actually called Pure Invention, How Japanese Pop Culture Took Over the World. And it's about how many of Japan's pop culture products, including, say, things like anime or karaoke or Walkman or video games and even aspects of social media, has basically been permeated throughout the world and come to become like a very big part of global pop culture. So if for anyone who likes any aspects of Japanese pop culture, which I guess is pretty much like everyone on this podcast, whether you talk about like Nintendo or anime or manga or anything like that, if you're into any of that kind of stuff, if you ever sang at a karaoke bar, you might want to pick up this book and check out like the origin story, so to speak, of all those different aspects of pop culture that we kind of take for granted in our lives these days. Another interesting book that I would highly recommend is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which is about the life of fungi. You can kind of consider it as kind of a, I guess, expose on fungi and all the things that they do that you might be familiar with or not so familiar with, ranging from having symbiotic relationship with things to doing things that people don't really expect fungi to do because they're either hidden out of sight, or most people usually associate fungi with mold or mushroom. But there's a whole lot more to it than that. In fact, you could probably say that fungi make life the way that it is on Earth. The way that I described to a friend of mine who is also a parasitologist is that this book is like Parasite Rex for fungi. And I personally cross paths with many different kinds of fungi because from my writing, because I write about some parasitic species as well. So that's pretty much what I've been up to, given that fungi actually featured in one of the episodes of the thing that we're going to be talking about for this episode. Let's us dive right into Netflix documentary Alien Worlds. And I'll just thought I'll ask, I guess, kind of give a bit of a general overview of a summary of your impressions of the show, just an overall view. I'll start with Scott.
I'm going to say that I think the show has some issues, but overall, I kind of enjoyed it. A little slow in spots, and some of the editing was a little disjointed, I would say. It wasn't always clear, at least to me, what each scene on Earth had to do with each subsequent scene in the fantasy realm of the alien worlds themselves. So that was kind of a minor issue I had. But overall, I am kind of fascinated to see such high quality CG effects on Netflix. Raven, what did you think?
I want to first start off with the general theme of the show was, I think, to kind of show how alien, quote unquote, some of the stuff on Earth could be, and not just to, kind of extrapolate it onto an alien planet, which they did, the concepts onto an alien planet. They also wanted to show just how weird life was on Earth, and then kind of tie it into like xenobiology and I guess exoplanet studies. But a lot of it seemed to be kind of shoehorned in together. I think some rearrangement of some episodes would have been probably pretty good. I think maybe they had too many editors. I don't know, each wanting to put their own spin on it. They did seem to have a lot of editors. It was kind of unclear from IMDb's page who was responsible for which episode. Got a little muddy there. But there were some aspects of it were really cool and things that honestly I didn't know myself. But a lot of it was kind of like basic primer for, I guess, more advanced sciences than what they teach in American high schools anyway. Basically, your general thing is you show kind of an overarching theme and you build up to it like you're building a story here in these episodes. That's the impression I got. I do have questions about, was this supposed to be a 6-part series? Because especially in episode 1, that's usually your intro episode to the series, as far as I know, with like other documentaries that have multiple episodes, say like Planet Earth. It was like kind of an overarching thing. They had, their own thing going on, but it was also an introduction into what you were going to see in the other episodes.
That does certainly seem to be my impression, that many of the bits and pieces, they seem to try to cram as much as possible into each episode, as if it was meant to be, say, a longer series with, like you said, maybe 6 episodes, but it's like, oh, we don't have enough time for that. We're going to cram all of this stuff in. And many of the placements of each of the segments end up being almost idiosyncratic. And it's almost like they got a whole bunch of footage about all these different topics. And then afterwards, post hoc, they kind of make a alien world stories to try to fit all those different themes in, no matter how idiosyncratic they are.
And I do have questions about some of the people in there, like the paraglider. Did the producer just know this guy? I mean, was this a friend of one of the directors? Somebody on staff knew this person?
Yeah, we can talk a little bit more about that when we go into each of the episode breakdown,
Of
because yeah,
course.
that stood out to me when they were talking about those sky grazers, and they talk about animal flight, and then who better to talk about animals flying than a paraglider?
A human person with a device to help them fly. Yes. Yeah. General overview is it. I found it plagued with issues. I really loved some of the imagery and the people that they talk to. It's like, no, go back to that person. I want to hear more of what they have to say. You only scratched the surface. You didn't even explain it. And that was kind of like generally throughout the whole series, this was my biggest pet peeve, is you didn't even linger on some of these things or call them out by name, what the heck you're talking about. And we talked about this before, Tommy, with what was it, episode 4, where they showed the Drake equation, but they never called it by name.
Yeah, that's right. They just show like as soon as I saw the guy writing on a napkin, and it's in the context of like aliens, and I'm like, Drake equation. This is where
Right?
they're going.
It's almost like a bunch of inside jokes for scientists.
Yeah,
Like,
that does seem like it. Yeah, because I did spend every single episode pretty much guessing. Like I end up playing this game that's not a drinking game because I don't really drink, but like it's like how I'll start a stopwatch and see how quickly can I guess like what are they getting at and who they're going to talk to.
right. And I find myself on 1 or 2 episodes where it's like I screamed out a question, and then like the very next time the narrator came on, it was answered. But it's like, for crying in the corner, guys, come on.
Well, my impression of the show was that it was using aliens as a kind of a framing device to introduce the audience to a variety of different science topic. I kind of wish that they introduced fewer numbers of topics, but
Yes.
go into more depth for each of them, and maybe for some of the episodes, especially episode 3, maybe forward a little bit more about like what they're introducing and what their alien world, how they would use that as a framing device. Because episode 3 seems the most frustrating. Well, I wouldn't say episode 3 is the most frustrating. Basically, if you have like kind of a graph as to like my frustration, and on the x-axis you got the episode, it basically just kind of increased, but it suddenly exponentially increased at episode 3, and then just increased a little bit more at episode 4, because I think I have a lot to say about episode 4.
Okay, yeah.
All right. Do we want to just seg into the breakdowns of the various episodes?
Let's talk about episode 1, because that is going to be the opening episode that, okay, introduce us to the idea of like alien worlds. And of course, they start off with someone talking about exoplanets, with the astrophysicists talking about the distance between different star system and how to detect exoplanets and stuff like that. And then we're introduced to the world of the sky grazers, which, to be honest, are basically flying manta ray. There isn't really anything too alien about them from what I could tell, but I'll let you guys talk a little bit about like what your impressions are and what are some of your thoughts about that first episode before I launch into mine.
Now, would you say introduced or smacked in the face with? Because I didn't see any kind of really introduction. It was more like, boom, now we have whales in the sky that are manta rays.
To be honest, I actually kind of was okay with this kind of like cold opening that was like, bam, alien worlds, look at these aliens.
But they're not aliens.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, if you linger on them for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize like just how unalien they are, because there's many aspects that were obviously cribbed from like real life animals down to, sky grazer. The concept of like a aerial kind of planktivorous animal is such a trope in many science fiction that I was like, oh, okay, this is a basically filter feeder that lives in the sky. I've seen this before.
I wonder if they were sort of limited as far as who they could get for the experts to be on camera. So that sort of kind of forced the selection of what they were going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that if they were, which that could very well be the case, they could have come up with like more interesting designs, I thought, because the
Oh, absolutely.
out of all the aliens, except the ones that are in episode 3, I would rate I was gonna say I would rate episode 1, the sky grazers, as like the most un-alien like, but then I think back to like episode 2, and I have stuff to say about those pentapods as well, but I'll leave it to when we actually talk about episode 2.
They start off with Dr. Dieter Ruelas, discovered the first exoplanet between 25 and 30 years ago.
I remember when that happened, actually. So it was kind of exciting.
Same. It's like, oh my gosh, it didn't even matter if it's uninhabitable or not. Just the fact that we can detect this star with this planet orbiting, and the way that they found it is through a method called transiting, where they point a telescope at a portion of the sky and they look at the amount of light emitted by the star. And as the exoplanet transits in front of its parent star, it causes a slight but perceptible dimming in the amount of light that is visible to the telescope.
Oh, okay.
So this is how they detect exoplanets. One method. The other method is if you're looking at a star from more or less the top down and you can't quite get a transit, and this isn't covered in this series, and I kind of wish they had discussed this a little bit too, is they'll actually point a telescope at the same place in the sky night after night, and they'll see if they can't detect a wobble in the star itself.
Okay, I was gonna bring that up because when you mentioned the transit thing, I was like, oh, hang on. The technique that I'm more familiar with, as far as like have heard more about, is the whole gravitational anomaly that you could detect.
Yeah, because even though a planet is smaller than its host star, it still exerts a small amount of gravitational pull on it, and it becomes more of a dance than just an orbit. So the star wobbles as the planets orbit because of tidal forces and gravity.
Especially as it gets closer to the star, because orbits are elliptical.
So they didn't really go into details about that. It would have been kind of cool to show like more than one method, but I understand, for time purposes, and Dr. Ruelas's method is the one that discovered an exoplanet first. So I could see them just kind of focusing on that, but it would have been kind of cool just to go in a little more detail.
Yeah, well, they don't have time for that because we need to go to Atlas.
Yes, right now.
The planet that is like twice the mass of Earth and has a thick atmosphere. So that's the reasoning for why they have the sky grazers, as if you don't have any flying animals anywhere else on our planet. But yeah, that was the weird bit where they throw to a paraglider, because I thought like, okay, well, they told me how animals fly. Would they go to someone like, for example, Dr. Michael Habib, who studied the biomechanics of flight and stuff like that? Nope.
Right? Nope.
Oh, yeah.
Go
Nope.
to a paraglider. That was very strange. That was like, oh, what? Okay, are they gonna
See, I thought that they could have probably just, talked more to the Falcon guy. Why even bring the paraglider in at all? And that's why I was speculating, does the producer know this guy or what?
Yeah, well, they brought in the Falcon guy for the balloon tick bit, which is like those balloon tick things. It seems like they just float up and then they just drop down like dots. It's not really what peregrine falcons do. It was just strange.
No, it was strange. It's like the analogy they're trying to draw here is sort of hampered by, well, we wanted to, on one hand, show you something really alien, in air quotes, but we couldn't really think of a way to tie it together with anything on Earth.
Yeah.
So the Falcon became the default because it happens to go into a stoop for acquiring prey.
Yeah, and the balloon tick things aren't really all that aliens either, because like I said, I call them ticks because they kind of just acted like ticks.
Yeah, but they were supposed to be like dragging it down to devour it on the ground, and that's so
weird.
silly. That is so silly.
And I had questions because they would let go after a while, even though
you're attached to it. Just take bites out of it.
Just take bites out of it.
What ticks do,
Yeah.
Yeah, or like cookie cutter sharks, because they have the cookie cutter shark kind of mouth.
That's right. And that's the case for most of the alien life that we see. That if you know anything about zoology or biology, you will look at those things and go, why did they do this? Or why did they do that? Because all of it seems to be in service of a spectacle that actually isn't really all that much of a spectacle at all.
Yeah. But in the show, they wanted to show how these creatures created drag But if at first you don't succeed, why not just hang on and have them fly up and then just collect more?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems like that's would have been really easy to show, or at least envision.
Yeah, one thing I have to say about the sky grazers, though, and this kind of alludes to something that you brought up earlier, Scott, is about the technical aspect of the show. The skin texture of the sky grazer, I really admired it because it really gives that kind of like naked baby bird semi-translucent pink skin. I thought that was really, really well done. It does look like there's like actual texture there. The creature design is absolutely uninspired, but the skin texture is like,
The shaders are amazing. And what you're seeing when you look at that sort of skin texture is called subsurface scattering. And yeah, I agree. Technically, like you said earlier in one of our hangouts, what you said about how it worked very well. I mean, the CG is amazing, really, especially for something that just appears on, Netflix.
yeah, some very good technical work done for some very uninspired looking creature designs.
Right.
I just can't get over the fact that why would you have something with a cookie cutter shark mouth that isn't just a cookie cutter shark?
One of the things that I came across that kind of baffled me was we then go to Cotswolds, England, and talk to Robert Hollingsworth doing the insect photography. And then we go back to the sky grazers and the predators, and I was a little mystified as to the connection there.
I think that the connection there is supposed to be like the male and female mating bit.
Oh, right.
Because about sexual competition, I was actually going to mention that because that's the next thing I have in the notes about how the sky grazers have these like supposedly oversized tail, which I couldn't tell unless they pointed it out that it's oversized because it's like, if you think of an animal with an oversized tail, obviously the analogy that they're drawing is like a peacock. But if they haven't kind of draw attention to the fact that the male sky grazers have oversized tail, I wouldn't have noticed. Like the fact that, when you look at the basic body of their sky grazers and the males, is like, oh, I guess it's a little bit bigger. And that's my other thing about, I guess, the show overall, and a lot of like alien designs, not just in this show, but in other media, including a little bit in Wayne Barlow's Expedition that we talked about in one of the previous episodes. It's the fact that they even have males and females, which even among the animals, it's not a universal thing. You have many different animals. In fact, the vast majority of animals have some form of hermaphrodism. Either they are just hermaphrodites that have both male and female organs, so there is no dioecious sex in those species, or instead of having males and females, they have females and hermaphrodites, or in rarer cases, males and hermaphrodites and no females. You also have some animals that are sequential hermaphrodites, where, for example, they might be born as male animals, and then once they reach a certain stage of maturity, they become female, or vice versa. So the idea of them having males and female on an alien creature, because they come from a different evolutionary lineage, entirely different to anything from Earth, is just very, very myopic view of life on Earth. Because if you move away from animals and start looking at other types of eukaryotes, look at slime molds and fungi, the concept of males and females or separate sexes and all that kind of stuff just goes completely out the window. When you have fungi that have mating types that could number in the hundreds or even thousands or tens of thousands. So the idea of them having males and females was like, well, that really threw any kind of suspension of disbelief from me.
At least they brought the hermaphrodism up with the pentapods in the very next episode. So there was that.
Yeah, I guess the thing is that they brought it up as if it's like, oh, look at how exotic it is, when this is actually the default state for the vast majority of animal on the planet.
Now, with this sexual selection part that they had about the sky grazers and their large tails, it really kind of made no sense to include the insects. I mean, I guess it did in a sense of like, hey, these animals do it too.
The concept and the theory behind sexual selection is so-called honest signaling, where the males or the more competitive of the sexes actually have certain ornaments on them that are very expensive to maintain. And so if they're able to maintain those things, it means that they're very good at both surviving and also protecting themselves against parasite, because if they're susceptible to parasite, they won't be able to maintain all those like elaborate ornaments that they have. And so that is the theory behind sexual selection and sexual competition. Like I'm trying to search my memory here, but the male's tail is maybe a teensy bit bigger than the tail of the female. So it's like, it's not that oversized.
It looks like, it could actually help with generating more lift too. Like if they pump it, it looks like it could be useful.
They need to put a little bit more thought into like the structures that they gave the males. And, with the caveat, like I said to Scott earlier, that the idea of these alien life even having males and females as opposed to other exotic form of mating types. Yeah, that took me completely out of it.
And, some people like to go, well, male and female is just biology 101. Well, biology 102 and fucking AP biology exists, guys. Come on.
Yeah, that's the trouble. That's why they stopped. And it feels like the show is a little bit like that as well, in that they give very superficial skimming of a variety of different topics without really going to depth about any of them, which I wish they did.
When they were discussing one of the next segments, which was the scene with the hatchlings, if you want to call them that, from the sky grazers, which was brilliant. I loved how you could like see the bones through the skin. That was really cool.
I was admiring that in order to distract myself from picking holes in the show because there are so many. I was like, yeah, look, just admire the really good translucent, diffraction of the skin texture and stuff like that to avoid writing down another page of notes, taking this scene apart.
But why do they do meerkats instead of like either octopus or like sea turtles?
Meerkats are cute.
I guess so.
That's what's the thinking behind it. Whenever you think about because by the end of the first episode, I got the impression that the show was basically built around whatever it is that they just biased towards talking to people who could provide cool footages. So like, for example, the astrophysicists, wow, cool computers. The paragliders, wow, cool paragliding.
It also strikes me that this was made in 2020. So I don't know if that's when just post-production finished up or if they were filming in the middle of the pandemic. December 2nd, 2020 is when this came out. So they were probably doing some filming during the pandemic. I can understand maybe they were kind of hamstrung on some things.
That brings up another issue I wondered about is the budget for the show, because clearly they sunk a lot of money into the CG special effects and had very little left over as far as time. The length of each show on average is like 45 minutes.
In some ways, I appreciate that they went out of the way to find, I guess, talking heads to talk to about like each of these topics. But on the other hand, they didn't really give them much time to talk about those things. And there are some parts that it adds so little to the show that I wish they just had like B-roll stock footages of certain things that are even more appropriate. So for example, with the bits with the little sky grazer hatchling, I could tell that they obviously cribbed that from natural history footages of little baby turtles. Like think about, you would have already seen like documentaries where they have little sea baby turtles hatching out the sand, running down the beach, towards the water to get away from the predators and into the sea, and then superimpose that onto those sky grazer hatchling heading towards that cliff.
See, we fixed it. We just with that one addition of some stock footage.
However, I suspect that if they did that, then people would know like, oh, you guys just totally cribbed it from that. It would kind of show their hand as like how unoriginal the idea actually is. This is where they actually cribbed it from. So I don't know whether that's also the reason why they don't want to show the exact kind of stock footage that inspired that particular scene.
They could have also showed like octopus though, because then it would have been like, oh, we totally cribbed this from octopus hatching, because the mother octopus actually watches over the eggs until they hatch, and then she becomes food for them. And that would have been kind of a cool thing to show, like, well, the sky grazers, they may eat seeds, but maybe they start off eating carrion, their own mother.
That's too original, man. Like, that's too interesting. Like, because there are actually many kinds of animals that, for example, there are mites that do it, there are nematodes that do it, where they do a form of birth where basically the mother animal becomes an empty vessel for the larva or the juvenile stage, and the juvenile stage basically eat themselves out of the mother's body. I don't know whether the idea is too gruesome or whether the people who produced the aliens and designed the alien were just not very original and well versed in zoology, so they couldn't come up with something like that. Also notice that when a sky grazer lay the eggs look pretty much exactly like that of horn sharks or
I
like other
noticed
kinds of
that
sharks.
too,
Yeah, yeah,
like that spiral appearance.
yeah. So I that just really solidified the idea that they just took a manta ray and then they put it into the air. So yeah, and I also find it interesting that when they have the little sky grazer hatchling crawling out towards the cliff edge, they got those tentacle blob monster things, which probably are the most actually alien-ish looking thing out of the entire show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I forgot what they called them, but they call them scavenger, which are weird because it's like, well, they're obviously eating like living prey. That's a predator.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I guess, scavengers that will do that. They'll just take advantage of things like skuas and Jaegers and seagulls.
I guess that's where you call them like opportunistic or facultative
But they
scavengers.
didn't use those terms, and really, that should have been like you introduce these people to these big multi-syllable words.
That I think they were just called the generalists, weren't they? I can't remember offhand.
Yeah, they didn't really give them names. Like it's like the balloon ticks. I don't remember what name that they actually gave them, if any at all.
I went back and we did a second watch through. They just called him an aerial predator, and it's like, oh, okay.
Well, balloon ticks they are then.
Yes, balloon ticks. So, and just to show how much they are cramming into 45 minutes here, we get another jump cut, another like whiplash cut here from the meerkat, who is showing its chops as a meerkat by eating a scorpion, which I thought, okay, cool. Are we going to be seeing these little sky grazers tangled with this big, predator that's trying to eat them? I mean, that would be cool. No, we don't get that.
Yeah, well, no time for that because we got to cut to the biologist who's going to dive into some cenote. And we spent no time talking about the unique biology of the cenote, nor the cause of them, which was, a major event. It was the Chicxulub impact that ended the reign of the non-avian dinosaurs.
Yeah, we just barely scratched the surface. They don't even call it by name. They don't call it the Chicxulub crater.
They just say like, oh, it's a mass extinction event. It's like, hang on, go back to the mass extinction event because that was like a really big deal. A massive rock fell out of the sky and created this ginormous crater, which was, as they alluded to, which was the initial cause of these cenotes. But instead they go, no, we have no time for that. We got to cut to the alien footage again.
I do want to add to that too. They were talking about the generalists surviving because they were generalists and tying that in with crocodiles. But what they didn't talk about was the survival of the dinosaurs because birds, they survived and kind of were able to thrive because they could eat the harder things to eat. They could eat seeds and nuts and things that survived the impact, but not necessarily the soft plant parts.
Well, we have no time for that because we got to show a crew crocodile and then we got to show some fake meteor raining onto a fake planet and then end of the episode. And then we'll talk about like, yeah, the blob things, they will survive for whatever reason.
Yeah, it's that crocodile was kind of cool because you don't know how old that thing is. I mean, he said it fell in there and couldn't get out. So that thing could be 50 years old just because of how limited the food supply is, but still available because of flooding or however things get into cenotes,
Well, there would be many other animals. Like I honestly wanted to find out more about the unique ecology within many of the cenotes.
Yeah.
But all they did was they used that as a framing device to, I don't know what, because
for nothing.
It seems a bit of a mixed message because it's like they alluded to the formation of the cenote via the mass extinction event, i.e. the Chicxulub impactor, and then they tie that in with the generalists, but then they didn't really do anything. It seems like, okay, is the cenote supposed to be representative of the mass extinction, or is it supposed to be of generalists, or both? Because you didn't go into any details about either of those topics. And
Not at
then
all.
credit rolls.
Yeah, right. It's like, and something else I want to point out as like a closer to this is not all generalists survive. A huge poster child for that is Lystrosaurus.
Mhm.
Lystrosaurus was a generalist. I'm pretty sure it would eat just whatever. Those tusks probably did some stuff. That beak was pretty good for other things other than just cropping cycads or whatever. And they were the dominant species on this planet between, the age of proto mammals and the age of dinosaurs before, the Triassic period.
Yeah, I think Stephen Jay Gould actually said that you survive a mass extinction event based on luck.
Oh, yeah.
And he said that by luck, it means that it's not entirely random, but you survive based on certain characteristics that you have evolved for other reasons. But it just so happens that those particular characteristics also help you survive this particular mass extinction event. And the cause
Right.
of mass extinction event varies over different geological period. So it's not like you can get stats and level up on the survive mass extinction trait. That's not how it works. You are good at certain things that happens to get you through a mass extinction event, but that doesn't mean that that would carry you through a different mass extinction event, which takes place under different circumstances. So yeah, they didn't really talk about it all that much. They do these broad brush kind of general rules, as you'll see later on in episode 3, that it's like, well, actually. Well, okay, let's move on to the second episode, which featured the exoplanet Janus, which orbits a red dwarf, and it's tightly locked so that basically one part of the planet faces the star constantly. Hence the name Janus with the two-faced thing. And they start off that particular episode with an interview with an astrobiologist on some sulfurous volcanic fields in Ethiopia.
I wish they would have made the whole episode about her. I just want to get that out right now.
Yeah, I actually wanted her to talk a little bit more about those particular kind of bacteria that she was searching for, those extremophiles, because it seems like this whole episode was framed around extremophiles, and they've talked to 3 very interesting microbiologists slash astrobiologists who work on some very interesting organism with very different kind of biochemistry to the usual variety of life that we're familiar with. And you would think that the episode would do something with that and show us some kind of alien life that thrive in an environment that is very different to that of Earth. And we have, for that, the Pentapods, which lives in an environment which looks not too different from, say, the Arizona desert.
Yeah, really. Are these supposed to be extremophiles in the same sense as these bacteria that we were just talking about? I didn't get that.
I didn't get that either. I think they kind of were confused about the difference between animals that live in extreme environments and extremophiles, because extremophiles tend to need a certain environment that is, just beyond what other animals on the planet are able to stand.
Yeah, like what would be hell for other forms of life on Earth would be paradise for them.
And they tend to be kind of small and single-celled and bacteria-like.
On this planet anyway. Yeah, because those are extreme environment. You can imagine if, let's say, on another planet where, say, for example, those sulfurous field and acid pools are the norm, maybe you'll have forms of life to evolve that, like for them, that's normal. That's the usual kind of environment. And there'll be little pockets that would be more equivalent to what we would be familiar with. And those would be considered as the extremophiles, because it's like, oh my God, look at these organisms that could survive without the presence of acidic sulfur.
Right. Well, it's like we don't call penguins extremophiles, and we don't call jarobas extremophiles, and they live in similar environments to the creatures of Janus that lived on either side of the planet, or either side of the what is called the Twilight Zone there, which is that strip of forever twilight that has the bright temperature for liquid water.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, speaking of the life on Janus, we have the Pentapod, which are supposed to be the dominant life on Janus and grow to the size of a cat, which are essentially standing for arthropod. Like the Pentapods are like the internet meme that popped into my head when I saw the Pentapod. It's basically Earth like has arthropod, and it's like, can I copy your homework? It's like, okay, but make it a bit different, because
Right.
they basically got an arthropod and superimpose his body onto an echinoderm, which have that five-sided symmetry, pentaradial symmetry. And then you have the pentapod. So it's just a bug. It's not really all that alien. Bugs are the vast majority of animal life on this planet.
Right. And one thing I also want to bring up too is when they cut to like the planets, sometimes they show like basically technobabble cards in set with these planets, and it's like you can't read them at all. Is this supposed to be important? Are we supposed
It's
to know
just
this?
fluff. It's just fluff. It's like, if you play BattleTech and then you have the fluff text, it's like, oh, those are nice to read, but they most of the time they do not factor all into the gameplay. I think that's kind of like it.
Another thing too is, they talk about it circles a red dwarf star, this planet Janus, and what they don't show is red dwarfs, they do a lot of things, like they have very violent outbursts and solar flares typically, which it makes it kind of hard for anything to survive.
Well, maybe they could have certain organisms that evolve there that could withstand that particular environment rather than just a bunch of bugs. Because, for example, ionizing radiation or radiation is often synonymous with cellular damage and death with the majority of multicellular organism. But there is one kingdom of organism that seem to love that kind of stuff, and that's the fungi. There are certain kinds of fungi that are radiophilic or radiotrophic. They are actually attracted to sources of ionizing radiation. There are molds that are growing in the remains of the Chernobyl 4 reactor, still very highly radioactive, but you have molds that are stuff like Aspergillus and penicillin species that they're not special mold. They're just mold that was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. We don't have to deal with anything else here.
You had a similar species that was growing on the outside of the Mir space station.
That's
in
right.
A vacuum.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, we don't care, man. We don't need oxygen. We got plenty.
I had a thought that like maybe given the human body and just animal body plans and all the demands in maintenance of the body of an animal, that maybe animals weren't really meant to go into space.
No.
But fungi seems well adapted to that, because fungi, especially some of the lichen-like fungi, they can grow on like the most barest of environment. I just thought I'll plug that book again, Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, because that's a really cool book. He had a whole chapter about lichens and how lichens are often the first form of life to settle on the barest of volcanic islands. It will just be bare rock and granite. And you have lichen that are able to grow there through this partnership of algae and fungi, and they're able to make a life on those environments. And given that many of these fungi are so radiation resistant, they can grow in a truly extreme environment, like in a vacuum of space, maybe fungi are meant to go into space.
Yeah,
maybe
that's an extremophile. That's an extremophile right there.
Yeah. Well, they're not even so much extremophiles, because some of the fungi that can live in the vacuums of space are the same kind of fungi that you'll find in like normal kind of household environments. They just seem extremely versatile. They seem to be able to do complex things that animals are incapable of in their fleshy, wet bodies.
Right.
So maybe meat bags aren't meant to go into space. Maybe mushrooms and mold are the things that meant to go into space. They are like,
Hey, we can teach slime molds to go through mazes. Actually, we don't teach them anything. They just do it. They go through mazes. By the way,
they talked about that in did they talk about that in the show?
No, they didn't. They didn't bring it up
Oh,
at all about slime
that's
molds.
right.
They talked about Snot Tides, but that's later on in this episode.
Let's talk about slime mold a little bit, because I think I wrote down some notes about slime molds, but that relates to episode 4 when you talk about like intelligent life. But anyway, back to Janus, episode 2. They talk about these pentapods and how they have like polyphenism, how they change their form in different environments. But the example they used were leafcutter ants, which they do have different form. They do have polyphenism, but it's not an adaptation to living in different environments. It's because they have this eusocial system where you have different individuals that perform different tasks within a colony. And that's not how the pentapod works.
Yeah, yeah. And so I had a huge question about the pentapods. It's like, what is the polyphemism based off of? And this is, again, they don't go into any detail about these creatures that they've designed. I really wish they would have. It's like, is it the amount of light they receive? Is that what triggers their forms? And here's another thing.
The temperature, or
yeah, is it temperature? Is it like the type of food? How and why? They don't go into any detail about that. And here's the thing that they do is they only show the middle form, the one that lives in the canyon, as the ones that are breeding. So are they the only ones that breed? Do the different, I guess, if you want to call them castes, you can, but do the different forms of, that wouldn't be a proper term. Caste wouldn't be a proper term. Never mind.
Yeah, because they don't function as a part of like a larger colony.
Yeah, so that, it's completely, it's a little disjointed to show a caste type animal in this situation.
Yeah, because there are certain animals that have polyphenism which aren't eusocial. So for example, there's a species of nematodes called Pristionchus pacificus, which depending on what kind of environment it finds itself in, it will morph into one of two forms. One that feed on other nematodes and bacteria, and another one that graze exclusively on bacteria. And that's a perfect example of something like that, because they don't live in an eusocial kind of a society or superorganism structure. And they are kind of individual, just off doing their own thing, kind of like the pentapods.
And, like I said, they don't show, like, do the desert dwellers and do the ice dwellers, do they reproduce too in a similar fashion, or is it only the Goldilocks zone? And it is like these two, just the end form.
They don't have time to go into that because they have to throw to the guy who are looking at scorpions, which is cool.
Yeah, blacklight rave scorpions at that.
Yeah, so in Death Valley, the venom and stuff like that, I guess whenever I see one of those segments, I try to get at like, okay, apart from the exact immediate thing they're dealing with, what is the theme that they're trying to get across here in a rather obtuse kind of way? And I guess the theme here is supposed to be convergent evolution. The fact that venom has evolved 30 times independently among animal life, that, you might have something like that evolving on an alien planet where it wouldn't be molecularly exactly the same as what venom we have here, but they might evolve like organisms that are able to secrete substances or molecules that are able to disable the competition, whatever that actually means in the context of that world. So that makes sense, but I wish they were more on the point about this is about convergent evolution. This isn't specifically about venom itself, so to speak.
So here's one thing I want to add. I've been talking a lot. I should probably let Scott talk too. But one of the things that bugged me about this portion is so, right. That's all I've talked about. This bugs me. It really bugs me. So
it's appropriate because the pentapods are bugs, basically.
Yes, they basically are bugs. But so why do the pentapods have venom? Because they talked about venom. They talk about the pentapods having venom, but then they show the pentapods getting swarmed by the little guys that they were preying on. And it's like, you could have changed one line about, it's not the pentapods who have the venom, it's the freaking things that they're trying to eat have the venom. And it's obvious because then it has all these things that are just like swarming it, and then it just drops dead. That makes no sense unless those were the venomous ones.
I think that is supposed to be the venomous one. I guess it's supposed to be like, aha, a twist. Not much of a twist when there's just two organisms on this planet, it seems. So.
Oh, yeah.
I thought that too, but they specifically said the pentapod had the venom and it used it to stun its prey.
Oh, okay. Huh.
That's why I kind of wanted to go in for the rewatch yesterday, is because like I wanted to make sure I actually heard that. And yeah, that was like in there. And it's like, why? That doesn't make any sense. That is so disjointed from the imagery I'm watching.
Yeah, I assumed that it was those little sandhopper looking things that had the venom, and that's why it overwhelmed. Okay, well, once again.
Yeah, it's confusing. It's the
Yeah.
way it's laid out is confusing. The way it's written is confusing.
Yeah, I wrote down on my notes here, pentapod wailing lol. Because it had this little pentapod wailing noise, which I thought like, I guess it's supposed to invoke like sympathy from the viewers, but I found it kind of funny, but that's just me. But no time for that. We got to throw over to another microbiologist to go cave diving for some snot tides, which God, I wish they spend more time on the snot tides
Me
because the
too.
snot tides are very interesting. The point that they were getting at is that I guess the theme here is supposed to be chemoautotrophs, like that they're able to have a whole ecosystem functioning inside a cave without photosynthesis. And that's the point of that particular segment, as far as I could tell.
Right.
But the pentapods and the ecosystem on Janus seems pretty bog standard photo autotroph and then primary consumer and all of that kind of stuff. So I wish they spend more time elaborating on this kind of like alternative to photosynthesis based ecosystem, which are, you know, the snot tides, which have some very interesting things going on. They're very acidic. They live in this extreme environment. It's believed that the snot tides are like a major force in the formation of these kind of limestone caves, or at least the structure in those caves.
That is interesting.
Oh,
I didn't
yeah.
know that. See, they didn't include any of this, and like you are so full of this information. They should have tapped you.
Yeah, but I wouldn't stop talking. Like each person get almost like 30 seconds to say their bit, or maybe at most like a minute, and then they have to move on to someone else. So I'm the worst person for that, because you won't be able to get like much of anything out of me for 30 seconds. But yeah, so the snot tides are a type of bacteria called Acidivibacillus, which they live in kind of these very acidic environments. So I'm just reading off the Wikipedia here. The bacteria derive the energy from chemosynthesis of volcanic sulfur compounds, including H2S and warm water solution dripping down from above, producing sulfuric acid. Because of this, their waste product are highly acidic. Their waste product have a pH that approaches 0 and has similar properties to battery acid. That's why they got to be so careful for when collecting those snot tides. So researchers at the University of Texas have suggested that the sulfuric acid may be a more significant cause of cave formation than the usual explanation offered of the carbonic acid formed from carbon dioxide dissolved in water. So that's really cool that like these limestone caves, that these bacteria that looks like little bits of snot dripping off like the hanging off the ceiling are major force in, like they didn't go into any of that.
No, I didn't even know that. I should have probably checked the Wikipedia.
Yeah, I had to read about that afterwards. It's like, okay, that is really, really cool. Why didn't you talk about that? But no time for actually any cool shit. We're gonna, you know, throw over to our alien B-rolls because we made them. So we're gonna throw over to them now. But yeah, that's really cool. I wish they actually spoke to the microbiologists and asked her to explain about some of this stuff, because maybe the show would inspire people to, like me, look up these things like snot tides and snoticles or whatever, and get them to read a little bit more about it. But I don't know, knowing like the usual audience online, I don't know how many people would actually dig deeper into many of the topics that they brought up, because that's the case with online, unfortunately.
So we whiplash cut to Arctic pentapods after the snotites.
Yeah, the dark side of Janus and the flashing grubs.
Oh yeah, the bioluminescence. So throw over to the fireflies. Also another interesting thing with the predatory aggressive mimicry. So you have the species of fireflies where basically they have like, I think it might be only the female that does it, of Photurus, which basically is a firefly that does the gaslight gatekeep girl boss thing of fireflies. They flash off a little light to attract male fireflies of other species to come over to her, and then she eats them. So that was, that was a really interesting example of bioluminescent, far more interesting than the pentapods and their bioluminescent. And then no time for that now because we got to throw over to microbiologists to give the usual line when it comes to these alien world or alien life documentary, which is how vital water it is to life. And the Goldilocks Zone, which they don't really go into much detail about, which is the kind of theoretical band around a star that is like the sun, which could support planet that have Earth-like condition. They didn't go into much detail talk about the Goldilocks zone. They just mentioned like, oh, the planet needs to be in the Goldilocks zone for it to have liquid water. Yeah. Can you go on more about that? No time for that. We gotta like end the episode now. We gotta cut to some footage of the microbiologist collecting samples from near what appears to be some hydrothermal vent. I'm going to talk about what he's collecting or what he found because there's some really interesting extremophile bacteria living in those environments. No, we don't have time to that. The episode finished. We've got to move on to something else now.
Yeah. It was always sort of frustrating. It's like, I know each episode is only 45 minutes long, but man, there is a lot packed into each of these episodes. And like I said, they just skimmed the surface of a lot of this stuff. And there's a lot of really interesting material that they didn't even touch.
Yeah, it seems like they cram as much as possible into 4 episodes when that it would have done better if it was like more episodes so that they have more time to actually delve into those topics. It's almost, I don't know whether the show just kind of forgotten the whole point of its own existence because I thought a show like this is to use these alien fantasy world as a framing device for actual science communication, but they don't have much time for the science communication because they prefer to have many different topics that are covered in an extremely superficial kind of a way.
If it's covered at all. And, that's the thing, though. It's like, oh, wait, go back because you didn't. Okay, well, I guess we're not going to talk about that.
Yeah, like with the Snot Tides, for example, instead of like having the microbiologists talk a little bit about the very unique kind of chemistry of these Snot Tides, they show the little fish that are eating the Snot Tides, which are like important to show that, okay, this is an ecosystem that thrives on this entire setup, which is away from photosynthesis. But instead of showing us like, oh, look, the little fish eating the Snot Tides, I wish they going into a little bit more detail about the chemistry of these things.
The Snot Tides started in the cave. Like that's where they evolved. They were bacteria that filtered down, but like these animals, like the fish and the insects and the spiders and stuff, they all started off in the light, didn't they?
Yeah. But they've been locked away in this environment for so long that they've adapted to this particular environment and probably won't survive outside of that. Certainly for the Snot Tides, they only live in those particular extreme environment. And that's kind of what I mean earlier when I talk about how, oh, for us, this is like an extreme environment. But imagine if you have another planet where this kind of environment is the norm. So they wouldn't be considered as extremophiles anymore.
But it's kind of cool with this whole ecosystem because basically the Snot Tides are filling the role of like plants.
Yeah, basically I thought that's what they were gonna be getting at. But then again, you look at Janus, it's like, oh, it's not extreme at all. It's just your bog standard photosynthesis based ecosystem. So why did we it's cool that you throw to the Snot Tide, but how did that tie into your alien designs?
Right. And, I guess it kind of like it was supposed to be a way to tie in Dr. Kennda Lynch, the lady at the beginning of the episode.
That was another thing about this show that, okay, they interspace these extremophile segments in this episode, but they don't tie them in together all that well because I guess because of the alien footage they'd come up with, they didn't really live in, when you think about it, all that much of an extreme environment. So we just left hanging with these like 3 different examples of extremophiles and people who study extremophiles, even though there should be some kind of connective tissue between them.
Yeah, they don't even say if the atmosphere on Janus is sulfur based. Like, why do we care if it seems like this is oxygen based life to me?
Yeah, bog standard photosynthesis ecosystem with oxygen and Like even in the dark parts of Janus, which you would think would get really, really cold, there's no framing or reference to say how cold it is. There's no snow or anything like that to show like, oh, this is really, really cold.
And you have to kind of take the people at their words for what they're saying in the episode. Like just referring back to episode 1, they give a size context for like Janus, for Pentapod, but like I have to take them at their word for how big a sky grazer is. They say it's a big animal, but they don't give any frame of reference.
Frame of reference is extremely important because when you talk to people about like what they think a big animal versus small animal is, they would think like, oh, big animal is an elephant and small animal is like a rabbit or a rat. But like the average size of a mammal, when you look across all of mammal diversity, the average size is something like a guinea pig or a rat. Like human beings are actually large mammals. We are like pretty large mammals. And when you look across all of the animals in general, the vast majority of animals are like much smaller than that. So most of the diversity in terms of sizes are like really, really tiny. And things like human beings are actually ginormous animals in reference. So when they say like, oh, the sky grazers are like humongous animals, are we talking about something the size of, say, a pteranodon, or are we talking about something that is like the size of a seagull, which, depending on the context, is still large? It's like, how long is a piece of string kind of a thing.
How long is a piece of string?
Yeah, exactly right.
This concludes part 1 of our discussion. Thank you very much for listening to us babble on about alien worlds on Netflix. We'll see you in the next episode.